This is the Hard Thing Podcast. Today, we are overcoming average. Welcome back to the Hard Thing Podcast. This is the podcast that helps you overcome average, step up above mediocrity, all by doing hard things. We're here to give you the tips, tricks, tools, tactics, everything you need in order to overcome average and have a better life. Today is our Monday show, so you're going to hear from me, your host, Justin Lewis, and a high-performing guest who has done hard things and has lived to tell the tale. And specifically, they're going to give you action items, things for you to do and try within your life to better it. And today I have a tremendous guest. Stay tuned to after the show for some announcements on how you can support the podcast. But let me tell you about today's guest. Today I talk with YouTuber and podcaster Amanda Neely. She is the host of the Fife Movement YouTube show and podcast, and she talks a lot about finances and entrepreneurship. It's a great conversation today because we give some really good action items on how to really take action towards starting a business, improving your finances, and getting on a better plane. One thing I really like about her story is her scrappiness and creativity and her ability to work with others and collaborate. It's something that we actually talked about over at the end of the podcast after the show. But it's one thing I admire about her, and one thing I'm going to try and improve myself. But without further ado, without further hesitation, listen to my conversation with Amanda Neely. Well, thank you so much for being on my show, Amanda. I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
I'm excited to talk with you, Justin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Let's start with the question that I love to ask all my guests. Amanda, what's the hardest thing you've ever done?
Start and run a business.
Okay. Now, let's dig into that because,
yeah.
I mean, you can say that and it might sound as easy as it sounds, but it's usually not. And based on what I've read about you, snowpocalypse, that's the only word that stuck out to me. But anyways, tell us about how you started your business, why, and some of the things that you learned.
Yeah. So I was a couple years after college, couple years into my marriage when my husband came up with this crazy idea to start a business. And my first answer was no. We were both working at pretty good jobs, in our cubicles, had a nice trajectory going forward. I'd never thought about starting a business before. And then we took this time, we really wanted to think about what is our future? How do we want to make a difference in the world? What does that look like for us in particular? So we took some time to fast and seek out the answer to that question. And we got 20 days in and we knew that we had to start this business, that it was part of our destiny and part of our purpose. So we went after it. We started from complete scratch. We were actually in debt. We still had our student loans. We went into further debt to get the business started. But it was really, I love kind of the philosophy of your podcast that you do the hard thing so that you become a better person on the other side. And that's there were all kinds of pointers along the way that's really why we were doing this, right? Yes, we were going to start a business that made a difference for other people, right? It was an ethical business. It would create jobs. It would, ethically source its products, all those kind of things. But really we were doing it because of the people we would become. And that when things got really hard, which we can tell all the stories about how it got hard all throughout. I remember one time, even a few months in when we were still working on business planning and still trying to get the funds together to start, my husband came home from work because he was still in his cubicle and I had left my cubicle and I was just in tears. I was like, we can't do this. This is not going to work. It's too hard. We don't have the money. Who are we kidding? We just can't do this. And we went for a walk. We got a sandwich at a little shop next door to our place. And we just sat down and he reminded me of that time fasting, it was hard not to eat, right? But not hard in comparison with figuring out how do we get this business started. But he reminded me of that certainty that we got from that time. And we kept coming back to that over and over again as our source of, yes, this is something we have to do. If we don't do this, we'll feel like we weren't going along the path that we would go on. And I remember that time in particular being one of the times when I was ready to run the other way and go back to cubicle land, do the safe thing. And he reminded me, no, remember what we felt at this moment that kept us going.
That's really fascinating, especially because I think, and you said that was towards the early parts of your marriage, right?
Yeah.
From what I've understood and from what I've seen in my own life and the lives of even some people around me, the longer you stay in safe cubicle land and the more entrenched you become, I guess, uh, the term golden handcuffs really comes
Yeah.
into play
Yeah.
because it just becomes so, and part of it's probably mental, but um, so I just thought that was really interesting. But I wanted to actually ask you, you mentioned fasting. You guys decided to do fasting in order to help you decide whether or not starting a business was the right thing or what to do with your life. Why particularly fasting?
Yeah, I've found throughout my life and times when I've chosen fasting, if I'm choosing it to find an answer to a question, not just for, vanity or, whatever, but I'm like, I have this big question. I'm going to fast to try to find the answer to this big question. Oftentimes that question, either the question changes, right? And I find an answer that way, or like I find an answer. And part of it's because when I would be eating, I'm spending that time meditating, praying, journaling, seeking after that. And it's an intentional time to do that. And other times I feel like it's just, I'm putting this question out to, I call him God, right? To say, like, give me the answer, and here's how determined I am to get this answer. You know, please show me. And he's shown up to show me that sometimes.
Wow, I think that's really cool. By the way, you are totally free and safe to talk about religion. I'm myself very, well, I consider myself religious. I probably can't say very, but no, I love that you talk about fasting, especially America has such a rich tradition of fasting, like
Yeah.
patriotically. I don't know if you know this, but, presidents, all the way up to, I think, John F. Kennedy issued national days of fasting and
Mm.
prayer to supplicate God for help on a national level. And, I'm kind of surprised that in this last year, COVID-19, more calls for fasting weren't put out
Mm-hmm.
by
Yeah.
people just all around. But so
Mm-hmm.
you said at the end of that fasting, like you understood that, hey, this is something that we need to do. Tell us about those calculations. Like, what made you decide?
Yeah, it was really this like sense of knowing that was on that spiritual or gut level, right? That we just knew that we knew that we knew that if we didn't do this thing, that we were going to regret it, that the world was going to miss out on something, that we were going to miss out on something. And when I actually talk to people thinking about starting their own businesses, that's my first thing, is that you have to know that you know that you know, right? That this is part of your destiny, because there's going to be too many times you want to walk the other way, run the other way. And if you don't have that sense of knowing, it's going to be too easy just to walk away at any point. And so I think, like, talk about action steps to your audience. If anyone's thinking about starting a business, to have that set time where you get that sense of knowing, and to not rush through it, I think is one of the best things that people can do. Even if they've already started, right? Take some time to take a step back, or to reevaluate.
I think that is crucial, especially because uh, even doing this podcast, and various other business ventures I've seen, so often the benefits and the drawbacks of the business don't necessarily align at the right time. Basically, what I mean is there will be moments where you'll have the drawbacks, but barely know none of the benefits. So
Right.
it'll be really hard to get that visceral sense of this is good for me. And if you don't have a memory of, like you said, knowing that you know, or just a deep vision, a deep belief, a solid understanding that this is what you need to do, you're going
Yeah.
to be like, wow, these drawbacks really suck. And where are the benefits? It's going to be
Right.
hard to make that decision. So I think
Yeah.
that's really smart.
And then when you do see the benefits, you can align them right with that sense of knowing, and the benefits are just amplified even more.
Indeed. Yeah. I wanted to ask, so you said your husband came up with the idea. Um, why exactly were you hesitant to, join him on the path of entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I don't even think I knew what an entrepreneur was. I didn't know any entrepreneurs. I came from a background when I was born, my parents are on public assistance. My mom did the hard thing and went back to college in her 30s in order to
Wow.
provide for our family. My dad, as I look back on it now later, he was very entrepreneurial. He was always building things, working with his hands, figuring things out. He was part of the greatest generation. He was born in 1928. So he just had
Wow.
that can do mentality, right? You do the work and you do whatever it takes to get there. And same with my mom, but hers within like the workforce. Right, going back to college and stuff. So when my husband came up with this idea, we started a coffee shop. That was his thing, start a coffee shop. And I just was like, why? Why would we do that? Like, it doesn't make like, why would anybody start one, right? There's plenty of great coffee shops we go to regularly. And it would like, there's also this part of me that my first answer to any question is often no, especially when it comes to my husband. He gets all these crazy ideas and I just say no right away. And then I have to and then he has to convince me about it. But yeah, I also was working at a nonprofit at the time. I thought I'd always be working in the nonprofit sector. I loved the work that nonprofits were doing. I thought that work needed to be done more. I wanted to change the world and make it a better place. So that's where I was. And I thought business, what good do they do in the world? Which was a whole transformation story there too.
Yeah. I mean, so often we as people, most people, I'd say, have this deep desire to help people and it sometimes feels at odds with the idea of getting a profit,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
actually you said it was a transformation process. How did you kind of bridge that gap and realize it's okay for me to benefit and other people?
Yeah. So it really started with when I was working for that nonprofit, I was a grant writer. So I would write grants to get money from people who had resources and give it to people who needed those resources to do good work in their community. And the first time I got to go on a site visit, I was bringing the grantor representatives to go see what their money was doing in the community. And I arrived there and I'm in my like stuffy suit, with these other people in stuffy suits. And we're visiting this community center where there's a bunch of activities going on, people doing exercise classes, all kinds of things. And I remember being like, I'm on the wrong side here. Those are my people, the people, at being active here and doing things. I identify way more with them than I do with these people that I came along with. And that was like my aha moment to realize I needed to be in that grassroots level, and that it wasn't part of what I wanted my life to be about in telling people who needed resources what they needed to do to get those resources. Because grants are very like specific. You got to do X, Y, and Z. Rather, I wanted to be with them, figuring out what do we need to do to better our community, to better our lives, make the world a better place. And then let's go find the money to do that. Right. Rather than, telling people what to do. And that was like my aha moment for shifting roles. And then when I started looking at how does real change happen in communities, it's the mom and pop little, independent businesses within those communities that are employing people, giving to, school programs, being centers for people to come together and, the kind of whole like third place idea. And then there's also businesses that are sourcing from all over the world, but doing it in a way that they pay fair wages, right? They're paying an ethical price for that product rather than enslaving people by paying very little. And what if we could combine the two? And so a coffee shop for us, there were millions of coffee farmers living in extreme poverty. What if we could help, pay them a better price per pound of coffee, and then also like do good within our community in terms of hiring people, being that center of community activity, giving back to our neighborhood, all those kind of things. And so over time, I started to see how that worked, but still I didn't have my personal benefit in there, right? You might have noticed that part of my story. I was still thinking about the coffee farmers, the people in my community. And we got to the point, so we opened the coffee shop in 2011. in 2012, we went through the hardest year in my life. In January, we put a cat down. In February, my mom had a stroke. In March, we got through it, just barely. In April, my husband's grandma died. In May, I had a miscarriage. And then in June, he had an appendicitis, had to get his appendix removed as a whole another emergency room visit. And we came out of that just tattered, like not knowing, who we were, what we were doing. A few months later, we were on the edge of divorce just because we were so like burnt out, we had put everything into this business of ourselves, not just money, but also our energy and time. And we hadn't been doing anything else. And that's when I started to have that aha moment of, I can't do all this for the benefit of other people. I need to benefit myself. I can't end poverty if I'm on the edge of poverty, right? I can't help people live more meaningful lives or like more fulfilling lives if I'm not fulfilled either, right?
Yeah.
And then that's when I started seeking, well, what does it mean to do good for others, but also like do good for myself at the same time?
Wow.
That was a roundabout way to answer your question of how like that beginning part of the journey. And then of course, it's a couple years journey from there to actually the first small steps were taking one night off to have a date night with my husband, right? That saved our marriage, right? That was worth it. And then we added, I got one morning and my husband got one morning that we could not go into the coffee shop, have some, whatever we wanted to do time just for a couple hours. Those are like the first two things that was like, let's do something for ourselves, right? Let's make sure we're having fulfillment. And then we started thinking about the money side, right? How do we actually make money? Because we were living on tips. That's all we took from the business was tips from the tip jar, like our share along with our employees. And so then we started thinking like, well, maybe we'll pay ourselves for a portion of the hours we work, the same that we pay our staff, right? The same minimum wage or whatever. And then, it kind of just, it's grown from there to have us make sure that this concept called profit first, that's developed by this guy named Mike Michalowicz. He wrote a whole book about it. But the general idea is when you look at your business, there are all kinds of people that are profiting off of it. What if you profited first, right? Before the vendors, before the internal revenue service, before the employees. And wouldn't that make your business actually healthier overall? And I've been totally convinced by that argument as I've taken like small steps to see how it works. And now I'm all in. I love profit first. It guides everything we do in our business now.
Wow. That sounds like a tremendous book. I'm gonna have to check that out.
Yeah. Here's what it looks like. Can you see that?
Cool.
Yeah.
Mike Michalowicz.
It's Michalowicz. Michalowicz.
That's awesome. Especially because I feel like the number one rule in finances and business in general is, just like stay in the game, right?
Yeah.
Don't do anything that's going to push you out, make you go broke. I mean, obviously bankruptcy's an option. It's not desirable, but yeah. And I love your story because it illustrates the fact that it doesn't, we have to get away from these win-win-lose situations. It can be win-win-win across the board.
Yeah.
And really that's how our society is going to move forward. Individuals like you, Amanda, thinking hey, how can I also pay my employee something that they enjoy and love to come to work for? But I also get to go home and take care of my family, myself, and make sure that we all go home at night safe and sound. We have a little money in the pocket and we're doing something that's at least mildly fulfilling, if not really fulfilling,
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
And why is that too much to ask?
Right.
Yeah.
It's true. And I just got to say, I'm really appreciative of people like you who starting a business isn't easy, when there's a problem in the business, and you kind of mentioned this before, you are the one who's leading out in your business. You started figuring out hey, I can't just give people success from behind them when I'm not successful. I need to be a leader, and you're stepping forward and you're taking kind of Have you ever on the freeway, maybe you drive a compact car or a minivan or something like that, and you find on this long stretch of road, highway, maybe you find a semi and you just drive behind them for a while. You get no wind resistance and you're kind of like sheltered. I
Yeah.
feel like that's what you're doing as a business leader sometimes. You're stepping out there and you're giving all this wind resistance to, or the shielding to people behind you, making way. And I'm just very appreciative of people like you.
Yeah, we need more of us in the world, people starting businesses and not being afraid to make sure that they're the semi in the situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in fact, actually talking about starting businesses, that's something that I think would be a topic to delve into. I think a lot of people would really be interested because, I mean, on its outset, like the American dream or parts of the American dream, I'd say, is the idea that you can, grab some lemons, squeeze them, make lemonade, go on, on the roadside, and you have a business.
Yeah.
And in theory, that's true, but there's a lot more planning that goes into it. I just wanted to know, what are some of the tips and tricks and things that you've learned about how to plan starting a business?
Yeah. Well, so assuming that you have that sense of knowing, right, that you've checked that off your list, you're like, okay, I gotta do this. This is a big deal. The next thing I would say is to not do it alone. One of the things that really helped us was figuring out all kinds of creative ways to involve other people, however we could, even if it was just, hey, you want to ride along in the car with me to go do this one thing, right? And it makes it more enjoyable. Like entrepreneurship is super lonely. It made it a lot less lonely to do that. I mean, we were also helped in that there was two of us, my husband and I, right? So he would involve a bunch of his friends. I'd involve a bunch of my friends. We'd be sharing the vision with anybody who would listen, and then just say, give us feedback, right? That's an easy way for people to be involved. Or do you want to help do X, Y, or Z? And that made the process a lot better, but in terms of how much we enjoyed it, but it also made the process a lot better in terms of how quickly it happened. Different things, like one story in particular, when we were doing the remodel of the inside of the space that we were going to be in, there was this old like hanging down part that blocked the sunlight, and we wanted that gone, right? Let's just get that out of there so that more sunlight comes into the space, helps it feel warmer and doesn't have this like weird thing from the 80s that was there. And so I was like, who wants to come help demolish something, like get out some of your stress, right? Like, let's do this. And a few people showed up. I bought everybody pizza afterward, and it was a few hours of fun together, right? Getting all like, sawdusty or, or I guess whatever the dust is from the like, plaster or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a lot of fun. And the guy that was kind of managing the project, overseeing things, he told me afterward, I would have had to pay somebody $10,000 to come and do that for us. We just saved $10,000. And I was like, we had a ton of fun doing this. And everybody else is saying, yeah, we had a ton of fun. Who doesn't like to demolish something on a Saturday morning? Right. And it was little things like that that really add up, right, to make a big difference for us. And obviously, a lot of people start online businesses, but that doesn't mean you can't be like, hey, friend, can you like my Facebook page and invite people you think might be interested to like it with me? Or, hey, could you like watch my YouTube video and be sure to give it a thumbs up and just, comment real quick for me, and maybe like share it on your socials, right? Like, there's tons of ways to involve people. If you just have that creative, you just sit down and think about it, right? And then don't be shy about asking, because honestly, people love being involved in something bigger than themselves. And not everyone's going to be an entrepreneur. Not everyone's going to start a business, but there is that thing in America where we want to be part of, like, we want to be the early adopters. We want to, buy that stock early on, right? And this is that kind of taps into the sense of, yeah, I knew them when they first started and I helped them start, and that kind of thing. So you're giving people that idea, right? You're not asking them to do too much, but you're letting them be part of something bigger. So it's like number 2 thing.
Were there any, actually, that's a really good, yeah. Were there any like asks that you had and you asked people to do that were bigger than, anything
Yeah.
and you were kind of uncomfortable doing it, and how do you do that?
Yeah. Well, so I came from, there's a couple that come to mind. I came from a fundraising background, right, with nonprofits as a grant writer. So we did some crowdfunding and we asked people to chip in what they could to help us get started, right? Help us buy this espresso machine and everybody chip in what you can and that kind of thing. So asking for money wasn't always the easiest. So that was a big thing. And then the other thing we did was what we called a setup shop committee, where we wanted to our biggest weakness was marketing, right? Like we just didn't know anything about it, didn't really know what to do. So we got together, we just invited whoever wanted to apply to be part of the setup shop committee. And we would get together, as many of the people that could, as about 20 of us. And we just brainstorm, how do we get the word out so that we're not the best kept secret? We have people lined up at the door day one. What does that look like? And we would just have fun, have one of those big Post-it notes and brainstorm all kinds of ideas, and to ask people to be part of that. Sure, I could say, you can add it to your resume. It can be a resume builder, but, to and ask for that investment of time and then turn around and say, okay, that idea you came up with, can you go do that now? That was because I wasn't paying them, right? It really was that sense of, I needed them to be getting something out of it too. And sometimes it wasn't always clear what they were getting.
Wow. See, I've actually been thinking about similar things lately, and trying to figure out, like, how can I involve people, but like, what's in it for them? You know what I mean? And that's a really interesting topic that you bring up. Now I want to ask, so in reading your story and things like that, I saw the word snowpocalypse.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. So this was kind of our COVID moment, but not, it was a few years earlier. I think it was the end of 2015 going into 2014 going into 2015. There was no. There's two different things. There's snowpocalypse, and then there's also the polar vortex. So let's do snowpocalypse first. This was about a month before the coffee shop was scheduled to open. A whole bunch of snow poured down on February 2nd, Groundhog Day.
Wow.
And the whole, Midwest just shut down, and our furniture was being built in Michigan, all the different things. It just delayed everything for a couple of weeks. And we were just sitting there like, hello, we want to get this business going, but we can't really do anything right now. And that was kind of like our first, things can go wrong. Right. And then, eventually things reopened. We got everything going. We ended up opening the day after St. Patrick's Day, which I love to say is the best day to open a coffee shop, especially in the city of Chicago, because everybody's hungover from the night before. Yeah. And so, that was one thing. And then can I tell about the polar vortex then?
Please.
So this is a few years in, and this is when the Canadian air came down and just hovered over the Midwest for like 3 months. We had -degree wind chills, very, very, very cold. And it was very much like the shelter in place we experienced in March and April of 2020. Nobody was going out. If they did go out, it was to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible. So you were not swinging by a coffee shop. And we did some fun things like say, we can be a warming center, right? Like, come on in, stay for as long as you want. You're able to turn your heat down at home and save some money, right? But it was really hard. We barely made it through that time. And we sat down with one of our friends who had a business that had been in his family for generations. He was like the third or fourth generation of this business. And we just asked him, like, how do we get through this? What's going to happen? And he's like, well, it doesn't really get easier. We're going through a really hard time too, even though we're this, multi-generational business. It doesn't really get easier, but if you can figure out a way to get through this, then you'll be able to get through all the other things that come your way. Right. And that was like, that hit us as like, yeah, we can figure this out. And so we started looking for ways to figure it out rather than just sit there in what is, and just say, well, what it is it what it is? Well, whatever.
Right.
And we started asking people like, you need anything right now? Any ways we could be of service that, we're not doing yet, just as, you talk across the bar while you're making
Right.
their latte or whatever. And we've found out that people were having like lunches brought into their offices because no one wanted to go out to lunch. They'd come from home to work and then they wouldn't want to leave the whole day and then go back home. Right. And so we're like, what if we brought lunch to your workplace? We could, we got this sandwich menu. We could bring, some coffee along with it, warm people up. And people were like, yeah, I could, let me find out who at my work I can connect you with that's doing the ordering for next week or whatever. And we started doing catering. No one knew we did catering. We had a little like catering menu at somewhere, right? But we started like putting that out there, and we did a whole bunch of catering during that time, and it really got us through. But I think if it wouldn't have been from, involving other people, being open to other people from the beginning, right? We wouldn't have had that friend tell us, if you can figure a way to get through this, you can get through it, right? And come out better on the other side. And if we hadn't had the customers that were willing to be open and share with us, because we'd always had that team mentality, who knows? We probably would have closed during those few months.
Wow. Isn't the saying like adversity is the mother of invention or something like that? Yeah. So there you go. Never let a good trial or disaster go to waste. And I know that's usually a phrase for politicians, but I think in this case, in a business sense, like how can we pivot? How can we change?
Right.
How can we lean down? And I'm really curious because in moments like those disasters, it's really easy for business owners who are, on this roller coaster of ups and downs to kind of just lose their head. So how did you guys stay calm?
Well, so part of it was still that sense of knowing, right? We weren't going to give up. We knew this is part of what we needed to do and see it through. And then part of it was also just talking to people, sharing with them the real struggles, right? Not pretending like everything was fine. If you ever talk to a business owner, you ask them, how are things going? It's always fine, but it's not, right? Business owners struggle, and they struggle hard. And to be open about that caught some of our customers, some of our employees off guard. But they're like, oh, I thought you were doing great. There seems to be people in here, or, whatever. Well, actually, no, that X, Y, or Z happened, or we have this one equipment that we had to do this repair on, or, all the things. Just living that kind of way, just transparently, not lying to people, telling them it's fine when it's not, really has helped us like be true to ourselves. And like, I don't know, it builds real relationships that people stay your customers when you have those real relationships too. Not that's why we did it. It's just kind of what happened.
Right. Honestly, from the point of view of an employee, being in a situation and having just that clarity, transparency from your employer. I actually worked at this place where I was kind of myself and this other gal were basically the only employees, aside from contracted out salesmen, but we were in charge of the onboarding process. So we knew exactly how many clients were coming on board, right? And we could see very clearly when the clients just started drying up and we didn't have anything to do, and we'd be sitting there waiting for the day to pass, and we'd still be getting paid. I mean, it was minimum wage, but we saw these signs. We could tell that like the end was coming. And so it wasn't surprising when one day my boss brings me in and says, hey, I got a job somewhere else, so we're closing up shop. And so I just have to say to our audience, if you are in a similar situation, be transparent, because like Amanda said, maybe the employees can help out. Maybe they have secret skills that you haven't delved into.
So can I tell you a quick story there?
Please.
We sat down with our staff one day and we just said, okay, here's our mission. We just want to suck less tomorrow than we do today. And we got some ideas for how to do that. Like, let's be a little more careful with how we measure our milk, so we're pouring less milk down the drain and, not being wasteful. And then let's just like I don't know, try to maybe sell 10%, like one extra item, like per shift. Just try to sell like one extra muffin or croissant or something. Just, see where that goes.
Hmm.
And, but like, whatever that looks like, let's just try to suck less tomorrow than we do today. If you've got ideas, we're open to it. And over the next 6 months, our business became way more profitable. It was ridiculous. All these different ideas from our staff. They were more conscious of not being wasteful, of making sure that, if someone looked like they needed a croissant, they got a croissant, like that kind of thing. And it improved all of our lives. And they felt like they were contributing to the business a lot more too.
Right. I mean, what is it? Like a sailing ship or a ship goes into a storm, right? And the captain, what do they say? They say all hands on deck.
All hands on deck. Yeah.
And I feel like so many businesses they don't take that to heart.
Yep.
They say some hands on deck, or the hands on deck that I feel are the most important. And they always put themselves in there when most likely the business owner is the least capable person of their team to actually make real change. And actually along those lines, now that, you are in finance, you're helping people deal with their own finances, even business people. What are some tips that you might give to someone to weather storms like this or prepare for them?
Yeah. So a big thing that, so I can't really say like specifically what each individual should do. You should totally work with a financial professional to know like what is true for you. But I can tell you a little bit about what's really helped me. A big part of that, as I've actually paid myself and figured out how to be profitable for my business first before anybody else. I've set aside some of those funds in case of an emergency, right? Built up that emergency fund and kept it in a place where I knew it was safe, it would be there for me, and I could use it whenever I needed to. And that's come in really handy. We had this pile of money, and we'd used a portion of it to we finally decided to treat ourselves to a vacation. And we purchased tickets for Christmas time in July and just get a really good deal. Right. And then the end of July, our business had a flood. And we were so thankful that we had that emergency savings, set aside that we could use to get through that. Because then also a month later, I found out I was pregnant. And we're like, okay, what do we do now? And that's when we started exploring options of what comes next. And we wouldn't have been able to explore options if we had to go into debt to get through that flood. If, we had maybe even closed the business because of that flood, that could have been a possibility if we couldn't get the money we needed to keep going. To that actually having that emergency fund literally helped us sell our business, right? If we hadn't have had that, we wouldn't have been able to. We sold it to a nonprofit, really great. And so that's like main thing is keep some cash available. Doesn't have to be in a savings account or a bank. I actually use this concept called bank on yourself for how I create that a little pile of cash that I can access to and be my own banker, so to speak, rather than running to the bank to ask for a loan when I need it.
Right. Go ahead.
You're going to say something?
Well, first I added have an emergency fund or start an emergency fund to our growing list of action items. I think that is very valuable. Over this last holiday break, my family and actually my in-laws, it's always the in-laws that corrupt you, but they taught me how to play poker.
Nice.
Yeah. And we didn't play with like real money because I don't like gambling personally.
Yeah.
But, it was fun. And I noticed that when one person at the table, obviously this is fake money, so in real life I think it would look a little bit different, but when one person at the table has like substantially more chips than everyone else, they can win the pot more easily because they can risk more without being emotionally tied in. And I feel like the same concept applies when you have an emergency fund. When you have an emergency fund, it's not so much that you risk more, but you're okay with taking the everyday risks, like running your business.
Yep. And as entrepreneurs, we take so much risk in starting and growing a business. We need to have that strong, safe foundation to take those risks from. And oftentimes, if we like to be able to leverage those assets in order to take risks, right? When you have a pile of money, it's a lot easier to get a bank loan when you really want one and can use it in your favor, or to get a line of credit to, buy the inventory you need or whatever it is. It actually makes it a lot easier to scale that way, to leverage those assets when you've actually built your assets.
Yeah. And that goes back to kind of what you were saying. And I guess what I was saying even before the podcast about how these hard things make you into a better person.
Yeah.
Being a financially successful person is the only way that you can have financial success. Like, you have to have those qualities.
Yeah.
And in order to have kind of a pot of money, you could say, or emergency fund, you have to develop the qualities of spending less than you make and putting some of that extra into emergency savings. Otherwise, it's, I guess you could start it with a government stimulus check, which might be a great thing to use that for. But if you don't have those qualities, that's not going to last very long.
Right. Because really, when we get more money, it makes us more of who we already are.
Mm-hmm.
And if we've built some of those disciplines, right, even fasting teaches us how to live on less, money wise.
Yeah.
There's a lot of those things that are crossover and can really transform our lives that way.
Yeah. It's funny when you're a kid and you're growing up and your parents are always trying to teach you discipline and all these things. You're like, oh, that's so lame. I don't want to know that. I just want to go play. And then I don't know what happens, but like randomly you just start thinking like, dang, I really need this in order to be successful. Like somehow my parents were right. Who knew?
Right. The whole idea of discipline brings freedom.
Mm-hmm. That
is a total mindset shift, and one that I think a lot of hard things can bring us to that kind of mindset shift.
Mm-hmm. Especially because at least in finances, the hard things are either you pay first or you pay later. If you pay first, you pay less, but it hurts right now. If you pay later, you pay more, and it hurts way more later. You know? So, now I want to talk a little bit about personal finance. So what are the most common problems you find in dealing with people's personal finances?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to risk. I think people are taking way more risk than they know they're taking. And if you can create that solid foundation that's not at risk, it can really transform even the places that you take risk. I did a YouTube episode recently about the 3 things that millionaires do to become millionaires. And the first one is they live on less than they make. The second one is they save the rest, right? They set it aside, anything that they're not spending. And then the third thing they do is they protect their wealth. They're not putting at risk like the average American is, right? The average American has 90 plus, % of their wealth at risk in things like the stock market. But to have at least a portion of it safe, then you can weather some of the storms of the stock market, right? We call it part of that idea would be have a volatility buffer. So when the market is volatile, you've got that buffer that either lets you still do the things you need to do, right? Like without selling stock, or lets you go buy some stock when it's down, right? And make a lot more there. There's all kinds of fun strategies that if you're willing to take some money off the table, right? Take it away from risk for a while, build it up, that'll let you take those calculated risks a lot more effectively, and also help you weather the storms when those risks don't go the way you thought they should.
I agree. I think people don't think strategically enough about how they place their money. And we've all heard the term of diversifying and all that crap. Not crap, sorry. But it's a little bit more nuanced than that. And I think that people really need to, think about the risk and the liquidity and the growth and create a very strategic, structure of how they place their money. Like you said, some that is very liquid, very low risk, but probably not that much growth. And then obviously some on the flip side, depending on what age you're on. And I think we don't teach that enough about all those 3 factors and all the other factors that there are.
Yeah. And I'd kind of challenge you. What if you could have safe, liquid money that maybe even grows better than your stock market money sometimes or over the course of your lifetime? Wouldn't that be
Uh,
cool?
it would be. And it sounds like you kind of have this answer in your back pocket that you're about to drop on us.
Yeah, I mean that's what I do. I consider myself a safe money expert, and I work with people all the time to talk about that safe part of their portfolio and how to keep it liquid, accessible, but also growing better than what you'd see in a savings account or a CD.
Wow. And how does that even, how does that work?
Yeah, so the concept is called bank on yourself. This awesome woman named Pamela Yellen coined the term.
Mhm.
She's got her, a website and all kinds of bankonyourself.com. But I'm a bank on yourself professional. I've learned a ton from Pamela and her team. I actually started using Bank on Yourself as a client back in 2013, a couple years into my business. That's how I built that emergency fund that I could use when I needed it. And it transformed my life so much that when we were selling our business, we were talking like, what do we do next? We can't go back to cubicle land. No one's going to hire a couple entrepreneurs that, they're just going to be afraid we'll leave and start another business.
Right.
And we got the opportunity to learn how to to help people the way we were helped with this whole concept. And we talk with people about it all the time. But it's not the right fit for everybody. And we're very upfront with people if it's not the right fit, but we know how much it's helped us. And if it can help other people in any way, like it's helped us, we want to make sure they know about it
Right.
and can learn, implement it for themselves.
Wow. Okay. That's cool. Going back to one question that I had earlier about starting a business.
Yeah.
When you were going through your business planning phase with your coffee shop, what were some of the things that kind of were essential for you to figure out?
Yeah. So we actually did a business planning retreat where we took some time off of our cubicle work. We took the paid time off that was due to us, and we sat down. We got a couple business planning books, and we got through the like mission, vision, values, kind of thing really quickly because that was so fun, right?
Yeah.
To dream, what is this place going to look like? What is it going to accomplish? What are our like goals in terms of how much money it makes, things like that. And then when it came to, well, what are all the numbers? We were kind of lost. Even though I had this grant writing background, I had to put together financial plans for grants all the time. We were like, well, we have no idea how much an espresso machine costs or how much we should charge for things. And I actually, we were connected with another couple who owned a coffee shop in a different part of the city from where we were.
Mm-hmm.
And I went and became an apprentice for her. I worked for 3 months for free, did anything she asked me to do. And I learned a ton. She even shared with me some of the financial things, how much an espresso machine costs, stuff like that. And that was super tremendously helpful. And even though like, I didn't get paid for that, it paid dividends for a long time, just putting forth that effort to learn as much as I could, because neither my husband nor we had never worked in food service before. I think he had been a waiter a few times in a couple of restaurants, but nothing, managerial or, back the house kind of thing. So that was definitely like our biggest learning curve, was how do we actually run a coffee shop and how much do things cost and how we got through it.
Why? I guess what I'm trying to say is you come from, cubicle lifestyle. How did you become okay with becoming an apprentice for no pay for 3 months?
It really came from that sense of knowing. And like, there were some parts of that story that it could only have been serendipity or God, at work. We, on that planning retreat, we met someone, and she like just happenstance, she was the manager of a coffee shop. And she was like, oh, do you know this couple that are in, your area, but not in your area? Like, you should totally meet them. And then she gave us the lady's email address. We emailed her and said, hey, can we buy you dinner and talk? And they said yes. And so we bought them dinner, and she came up with the idea, well, it sounds like you want to know a lot of stuff. How about I'll teach you? And I was like, yeah, sure. And so it was kind of just like all those open doors and green lights just kind of aligned. And I'd also kind of learned from my dad early on just how much you can do with very little, right? So the other part of the story is, so this was 2008, and the nonprofit that I was working for was starting to feel the effects of 2007 and the Great Recession. And I'd gone on this ladies retreat just with some women from my church, and there was this one moment where I just felt like God was talking to me to tell me to leave my job. And I didn't want to talk to anybody. I kind of like hid in a corner. Nobody come talk to me. I don't want anybody to tell me I should leave my job, because I don't want to leave my job yet. And ended up talking with a woman, twice my age, who gave me some really wise words. She's like, well, like, he didn't tell you when, right? You're going to leave your job eventually to start this business you're thinking about, but he didn't tell you when. So just wait for the timing. And sure enough, the next week, my nonprofit announced layoffs. And I was like, oh, great. I could leave at any moment, and yet they're going to lay off somebody else who has a family to feed. I'm torn here. And so I went and talked to my boss, told him what I was feeling, not really like, I'm not putting in my notice, just wanted to share what I was feeling.
Right.
And he was like, well, you should talk to your other boss, who was like his boss and my boss at the same time. Like, right. But he was like a higher up. And so I went and talked to him, and he was like, thank you so much. We're going to honor this. When we do the layoffs, we want you to stay for an extra month to train someone to take over for you and do the things you're doing. So we'll give you that extra month. And, but like, you can't get unemployment benefits then if, you resign. I was like, mm-hmm. Well, okay, whatever, we'll figure it out. And all the things lined up in that season so that I left my job, and the next day I started the apprenticeship. And we just figured out how to live on just my husband's income.
Wow. Just curious, kind of a hypothetical situation.
Yeah.
If all the things didn't line up, would you still have done the coffee shop?
I think we would have kept going at it until they did line up, right? We had that determination that come hell or high water, as my dad would say, we were going to make it happen. And so I think that even if those doors wouldn't have been the ones that opened, we would have busted down some other door.
Yeah. I think that's really important to know, because some people out there might be thinking like, hey, well, things haven't really worked out for me yet. And I mean, sometimes they do. Sometimes all the right. lights are green, and sometimes all the lights are red, and sometimes there's a mix of both. I just want to make sure that the audience is like, yeah, in my situation, it might be a little bit different,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And there's been some things that we've wanted to do that haven't worked out. We've actually had 2 other ideas that just, they're gone, right? Like that we tried. And the thing I come back to is this idea, like, yeah, you'll try some things. Some will work out, some won't. Sometimes you'll get green lights. Sometimes you'll get red lights. If it's meant to be, it will be. And just keep looking for the green lights, but also don't be afraid to wait at a red light for a little while until it turns green, right? That you can't rush the clarity. I mentioned sometimes with fasting, it's not that I get the answer to my question, it's that my question changes, right? Sometimes while you're waiting at that red light, you'll see you could turn right and there's a green light that way. And that's totally cool too.
Wow. I like that. It's not that it's not that you get the answer to your question, but sometimes the answer changes. That's really pivotal.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for being on the show. We're coming down to the last little bit here. So I want to ask you the last little questions. I guess the last question, we're doing things a little bit different today. So here are the action items that I pulled from our conversation based on some of the things that we were like, hey, this is a good one. Number 1 is to work on getting the sense of knowing about your business. And then number 2 is don't do it alone / find a team creatively. And then number 3 is start your emergency fund. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I guess part of that emergency fund is, to put profit first, right? And that's kind of what you have to do in order to have that cash available. And you can, that can be money that flows out of your business and to you that then you set aside, whether you need to put it back into the business or whether you need it to pay your rent, or something like that in the future. But it can also be even within your business. A lot of businesses pre-COVID didn't have cash in the bank, right? And so when COVID hit, they had, and they lost their revenue for a period. They didn't know how to operate. And thankfully the government came through and, worked for a lot of people, still a lot of businesses that are having a hard time. But I kind of wonder, what if more businesses had a cash reserve, even within the business, to weather those kind of storms? And sure, that might mean a temporary loss of profitability in terms of the inventory you can buy, or, that kind of thing. But maybe that longer term contributes to your business health and maybe even saves you from having to close.
Yeah. Like I said, the number one key is to keep playing the game. The longer you can play the game, the more success you'll have. And if you can stay during those maelstroms of financial turmoil, then all the better. So
right. But remember, playing the game sometimes is sitting on the sidelines for a little bit to recoup so that then you can get back in.
Indeed. Yeah.
Thanks
again, Amanda, for being on the show. How can people reach out to you, support you, see what you're doing?
Yeah, I'd love, if you're a YouTube fan, check out our YouTube show. It's called The Neelys Present Grandma's Wealth Wisdom. That's the name of our business, Grandma's Wealth Wisdom. And I've got a little show on there called The Fife Movement, where I talk more about entrepreneur pursuits toward financial independence. And then, of course, if you're listening on the podcast, you can find the Grandma's Wealth Wisdom podcast or the Fife podcast, F-I-F-E, on anywhere podcasts are available.
Awesome. I will get all that up in the show notes below. And thank you so much for those action items. I think that is very actionable stuff. So hopefully our audience will take action and do something and move towards having a better life. So
yeah, great. And please, actually, whatever sparkled to you, audience, today, take note of it, spend some time thinking about it some more, and most importantly, do something because of it.
Excellent. Thanks again, Amanda. I really appreciate you being on the show. I think we had a great conversation.
Thank you. I do too.
Excellent. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Hard Thing Podcast. I really want to challenge you guys to do those action items Amanda gave us. They are actionable. They are forthright. I think that's a word. But if you do those, I'm sure that you will move in the right direction towards where you want to be. Now, if you want to support the podcast, which we would obviously highly appreciate, there are a couple ways you can do it. First of all, make sure you subscribe to the show so you never miss a single episode. We have episodes on Mondays and Thursdays. Thursday, you'll hear me and my co-host, Ty Crockett. And it's just a really great way to get good information in your head at all times. So subscribe to the show, never miss an episode. Next, go ahead and share the show with someone you know who would benefit from the episode, from the show. Someone who might be struggling with their finances or just doing hard things in general. Next, we just want to give something back to you guys. So if you want to get a free audiobook from Audible, you can go to audibletrial.com/thehardthingpodcast, get a free audiobook today. They have titles, over 180,000 titles in genres, all sorts of kinds. I actually just finished listening to, or maybe I haven't finished, but I'm listening to The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. It is fantastic. Imagine The Jungle Book, but transpose that entire story into the graveyard and the macabre and all things dark, and it's just a fun story, fantastic. So go give it a listen at audibletrial.com/thehardthingpodcast. Now, in today's show, Amanda and I talk a lot about finding some way to involve others in your business, in your venture creatively. It's a great way to do that, and all you need to do is just ask people for help. Well, in order to do that, you do have to have a community of people who you trust, and who value what you're trying to do, who support it. So if you want to get a community like that, join The Forge. Now, you might be thinking The Forge is the name of the Thursday show we put out every Thursday. Well, you're right, but it's also the name of a free community we created for like-minded people to band together, to tribe together, and to support one another. As well, you get a couple things when you join The Forge. First of all, you get access to weekly challenges we put out, and if you respond to the challenge with a photo or a video, we will show that on our social media and shout you out on the podcast. Now, also, you get access to discounts on our merchandise. Yeah, that's right. You can go to thehardthingpodcast.com/shop and get discounts on those items. And then last thing you get is actually access to live streamed episodes. So you'll see me interviewing guests in real time. You'll be able to ask questions in the chats, and I'll ask the guest for you. It'll be a fun thing. And for our Thursday shows, you won't see us when we do bloopers, or I mean, you will see us when we do bloopers, and you'll see when we mess up and things like that. We won't be able to edit it out, so you'll get kind of a behind-the-scenes look there. So if you just join The Forge at theforge.mn.co, you'll get access to all those things, but most importantly, you'll get access to a tribe, a network of people who want to support you, and people who you can get joined into what you're doing. As always, we'd like to invite you to check out Operation Underground Railroad. They're a nonprofit organization that goes undercover to rescue kids from sex trafficking, so go to ourrescue.org, or if you want to actually make some donations, help us raise $1,000 for them. We have a GoFundMe going for them called gofundme.com/overcoming-average. All that money goes straight towards them. It's a goal we've had since the beginning of this podcast to raise $1,000 for OUR. Help us help them save kids. I love this show. I love talking to these people. I love having these conversations. And more than anything, I love seeing what it does in my life and in your life. And I love the changes it's helping us make. So without further ado, go out and do some hard things, because you will overcome average.